Welcome to a live stream episode of The Watchdog with me, Low Key, here on Mint Press. As you know, we are going against the grain on a weekly basis, covering the stories which the mainstream media seem to be allergic to. And this week, we have a really fantastic show for you. As you know, Mint Press is independent media in every sense of the word. We are not backed by corporate oligarch billionaires. We are not a mouthpiece that merely reproduces the press release given to us by the Ministry of Defense, either in the UK or the US or anywhere in the world. For that reason, we rely on your support. So we call on you, anyone watching this, to not only like, share, and subscribe with this video, but please do support us on Patreon now so we can keep providing you with this important information for us to fight back. Now, this week, we are in the midst of the biggest rail strike in several decades in this country. 3 days across this week, we are seeing 50,000 rail workers go on strike. Now, the RMT union, which represents overall 80,000 workers, when it sought to reach a deal with the rail companies which employ its members, the level of inflation at that time, according to the retail price index, had increased by 7.1%. Now, since then, the initial offer that the employers made to the RMT union was merely 2% rise with the possibility of a 3% rise on condition that the union accepted thousands of statutory redundancies. Now, the RMT at that time were only asking for a 7% increase so as to be in line with the rise in cost of living. In real terms, what was being imposed on them was a pay cut and redundancies. Now, today, we're in a situation where, according to the RPI, inflation stands at 11.7%. That means that the prices of things have increased at a level that wages are not in line with. So now the RMT and their members are collectively bargaining by withholding their labor over a 3-day strike. Now, it is important that we communicate very, very clearly that a win for RMT members is a win for all of us. This strike really only represents a warning shot for an inevitable summer of discontent. Now, much of the focus in what has been discussed here has been on Network Rail. Now, Network Rail is an arm's length semi public company where the CEO, Andrew Haynes, is paid about £600,000 a year. Now, that is 20 times more than many of those who are striking over these 3 days. In fact, the 73 highest paid employees of Network Rail equate to 15 million a year. Safe to say that none of those people are on strike right now. However, that disparity is symptomatic of a far wider and far reaching arrangement of our railway system since privatization in the John Major government of the 90s. The railway service in this country is not only a tool through which to siphon resources upwards, it is a conduit through which public funds are being funneled out of the country. What do I mean by that? Now, the 13 train operating firms that workers are in dispute with are owned by only 7 companies. Now, these companies are mostly foreign state-owned enterprises. For example, Abellio, which operates Greater Anglia, East Midlands Railway, West Midlands Railway, and partly operates Northern Trains, is the international arm of a Dutch state-owned rail company. In 2019, Abellio extracted 2.95 billion from this country through the labor of those currently on strike. Now, when we look at Chiltern Railways and cross-country trains, they are operated by Arriva, which is the subsidiary of a German state-owned company. In 2020, the CEO of Arriva was paid 1.34 million a year as his wage. Now, Avanti West Coast is partly operated by Trenitalia, which is an Italian state company. You also have Southwestern Trains being operated by the MTR Corporation, which is a Hong Kong-based company which pays its managing director £1.18 million per year. There are some companies closer to home involved in operating the trains, like Serco. Its relationship with the Conservative government is well documented. The Minister of State for the Department of Health and Social Care, Edward Argar, is actually previously Serco's head of public affairs. And of course, the CEO of Serco, Rupert Soames, as has been covered on this show previously, is both the brother of a former Conservative MP and the husband of a Conservative Party donor. You also have First Group, again closer to home. This is a company which operates Great Western Railway and Southwestern, and it accumulated profits of over £200 million in the last year, and its CEO collects a wage of £840,000. Now, there's a reason when I've said here about these companies, what I've said has only used the word operates, and that is because following John Major's privatization of the British rail system, you had the introduction of what is known as rolling stock companies. Now, those rolling stock companies actually lease the trains to these companies at a fixed rate, meaning regardless of activity, the rolling stock companies get paid a fixed amount of money. So all of this, the much vaunted 16 billion that was put into the railways throughout COVID by the British government, it wasn't about supporting employees. It was about supporting these particular companies. Again, the rolling stock companies which own the trains and lease them to the above companies that I have mentioned for workers to operate are an assortment of vehicles through which profits are extracted from here to elsewhere. So, for instance, you have Porterbrook. Now, this is a company which claims to have been at the heart of Britain's rail network for 25 years. It is owned by German, Canadian, French companies, and also an Australian asset manager. Angel Trains, which claims to operate 1/3 of all trains in the country, it claims that it actually leases, it owns 4,000 trains on the rail system. Angel Trains is in fact a subsidiary of Willow Topco Limited. Now, Willow Topco Limited is based in the tax haven of Jersey, meaning that 4,000 of the trains operated in this country are rented from a company which siphons the profits out to a tax haven. Eversholt Rail Group is another one that is important in this rolling stock companies arrangement. It's actually owned by the Hong Kong-based CK Infrastructure Holdings. Now, those three companies, Porterbrook, Angel Trains, and Eversholt, own 87% of the rolling stock on Britain's railways. These are the material beneficiaries of a rail sector which has seen the average ticket price increase by 23.5% since the industry was privatized. And in 2021, the rail workers and government funding generated an income of £20.7 billion for these companies. It is a simple statement of fact to say that the rail industry can afford to give a rise in wages to railway workers in line with inflation. Now, few of us here have been able to escape the vision of Mick Lynch completely bodying and destroying his interviewers all over the media. And I've sent a video with the Piers Morgan interview to our fantastic producer of this podcast, Manar, who, if you could play the Piers Morgan interview with Mr. Mick Lynch so the audience can see.
The sun is shining, the birds are singing, all seems right with the world. Well, that didn't last long, did it? Yes, summer has barely started when all hell's about to break loose. If you're hoping to get a train in the UK next week, well, forget it. Millions of people across the country just trying to go about their businesses are facing utter chaos because rail workers are striking over pay and jobs, and they say it could go on all summer. At least 50,000 workers will walk out, meaning and 1 in 5 trains will run. Network Rail estimates that the strikes will cost the rail industry up to 150 million. Well, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps said the strike could lead to rail workers losing their jobs.
I appeal directly to rail workers, who I think are less militant than their union leaders. Don't risk striking. Don't risk the industry and your future. Don't risk striking yourself out of a job. Don't pitch yourself against the public.
Don't risk striking yourself.
You know, my wife's like, "What'd you do after 6 months of doing this?"
There's an advert now playing. If Manari would be able to skip the advert. But if you could take us back, there's a point where Piers Morgan interviews Mick Lynch towards a little bit further on in the video. If we can get to that. Now, the key thing about the interview, just play it when you are ready, is that Piers Morgan's new show on this Murdoch-owned channel, Talk TV, it promised to cancel culture and was widely promoted as a strike back at censorship. Now, Morgan hosted the General Secretary of the RMT, Mick Lynch, at the outset of the strike. Let's not forget that Mick Lynch only entered engineering work on the railways because he had been blacklisted out of the construction industry for joining a trade union. He was alongside thousands of others who were found to be victims of a really existing cancel culture, which entailed the cooperation of special branch and spy cops gathering information on workers and feeding it into a corporate database to be shared with construction companies, hoping to avoid workers that knew their rights on site. Now, Mick Lynch was one of those thousands. His return as a representative of the RMT is a testament to his strength of spirit, and it stands in stark contrast to the synthetic claims of being cancelled from Morgan and other handmaidens of corporate media. Now, in this interview, if we can pull it up, go ahead, if you can play that, Manar.
Mick Lynch, who's responsible for all the mayhem that's about to come our way. Mr. Lynch, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Yeah, I suppose my question is this. We've just come through a 2-year pandemic. We have the appalling after effects rippling through Europe from war in Ukraine. We've just about got over the fractured mayhem of Brexit. And now, just when it looks like the sun is literally coming out and people can start to feel hopeful and positive about life, along come you, and you're going to cause complete chaos and mayhem for the British public for the foreseeable future. And I only ask you, why do you think this is the right time to do this?
Well, the sun's not going to shine on our members, Piers. If they lose their jobs, they're facing pay cuts in relation to living standards, and they're facing having their conditions ripped up. We've been engaging with these employers and indeed the Department for Transport and various ministers for more than 2 years since COVID commenced back in
we can just
March
fast forward
2020.
it on a little bit,
and
please,
we've put to them last December that we needed the...
I've supported actions in the past when I felt that they're justified and they're well timed. It's the timing of this. It's the fact that so many ordinary people going about their ordinary lives are going to be facing complete chaos for the next week and maybe many weeks after that. Just so that everyone's starting to feel a little bit better about life. And I would put it to you, if you're putting the devil's advocate position on this, the government has pumped billions into the rail industry, as it has many other industries throughout the carnage of the pandemic. Network Rail says they've not announced any job cuts and will find job savings by not replacing employees who leave the organisation through voluntary redundancy. Obviously, I guess that's an arguable point between you and them. You're after an 11% rise for your members, some of whom, as you know, not all, but some of whom are train drivers earning £54,000 a year. Now, I would say to you, look, I'm not against your workers being protected by you. You're doing your job. But when it comes to pay rises following a pandemic, why are we not giving nurses 11% pay rises?
Okay.
Police workers, 11% pay rises. People who are really...
So here we see the entire presentation of this is about splitting workers and putting them in a sort of antagonistic position with health workers. Now, what we have to remember about this interview is that later on in it, you see Piers Morgan pompously barking rude questions at Lynch, asking a blacklisted worker how much he earns and whether he was a millionaire, in what was a naked attempt to infantilize the debate around this dispute. Now, when Lynch turned the question of earnings back to Morgan, Morgan replied with signature arrogance, "I should hope more than you." Now, let's not forget that Talk TV is just merely another archipelago in ruling class warrior Rupert Murdoch's empire, News Corp. Now, News Corp, according to the government, to the Guardian, effectively avoided paying any corporation tax in the UK for 11 years, despite extracting astronomical profits. The company was believed by the Washington Post to reduce tax by channeling profits through a complex web of subsidiaries in low tax locations or tax havens like the Cayman Islands and Bermuda. We have to remember that Emperor Murdoch and his minions honed their skills at strike breaking in the dispute with workers at the Wapping pressing plant in 1986, where almost 6,000 workers went on strike and Murdoch instantly fired them. It's also been revealed that Special Branch subjected the dispute to intense surveillance, producing written daily briefs on all aspects of the pickets, demonstrations, negotiations, and union meetings. It's also now known that the infamous spy cop Bob Lambert actually infiltrated the picket lines outside the Wapping plant. Now, the pivotal role that media will play in this war on the RMT and all of our rights to wages in line with inflation can be seen in the appointment of veteran journalist Andrew Gilligan to a government task force to break the strike. Now, we've seen the political class in Britain wave around, flail around wildly in a bid to cope with this simple application of pressure from railway workers asking for wages in line with inflation. Now, Keir Starmer has characteristically scuttled under a rock somewhere and is yet to emerge with the new lines of sweet nothings that his handlers have prepared for him. Mick Lynch has also poignantly articulated the irrelevance of the Labour Party when he said, "We don't give any donations to the Labour Party." That's another myth. We are not affiliated to the Labour Party and we have no formal association with them. It's not a problem that we can't get Labour on side. It's Labour's problem that it can't get working people on side. This strike is communicating the Labour Party's limited use to the British establishment in subverting industrial action and crushing local labour in the interests of offshore capital. Now, when Transport Secretary in that clip, Grant Shapps, implored striking workers not to risk striking themselves out of a job, it should be read as a veiled threat of blacklisting to workers, which Mick Lynch has said he is sure still continues to this day. Now, as the psychological warfare deepened, you saw Tory MP Tobias Ellwood, who simultaneous to being an MP is a lieutenant in the British Army's actual psychological warfare unit, the 77th Brigade, making the claim that the RMT are friends of Putin. Now, this is typical deflection tactics from a professional in information warfare. As inflation rises daily and ministers make pronouncements out of one side of the mouth that the public needs to cope with a pay cut, and out the other side of the mouth that the limits on bankers' bonuses will be lifted, the likelihood of more sectors withholding their labor increases by the minute. Now, this is clearly understood by the British establishment. Former Chancellor Ken Clarke stated that the rail strikes cannot be allowed to look successful, because if they do, vast amounts of the public sector will be induced to go in for the same militancy, the same strike action. Now, that is the very reason why this strike must succeed, because when they win, we all win. Now, according to the Savanta Comres opinion poll, 58% of those asked believed that the RMT strike is justified. And this strike is a harbinger of things to come. You have bus workers in Liverpool that have voted to strike. Drivers for Arriva have gone on strike for 2 weeks in Yorkshire. The Criminal Bar Association has informed the courts that criminal law barristers will go on strike next week over the slashing of legal aid. The National Education Union, which represents almost 500,000 education workers in the UK, is set to ballot their members on industrial action. Unison, which represents the very health workers that Piers Morgan was trying to weaponize against Mick Lynch. These workers are also set to ballot their 1.3 million members on taking strike action. And the Communication Workers Union is also balloting their 200,000 members on whether to take strike action against Royal Mail. Welcome to the summer of discontent. This is a rebellion of those who plant the fruit of our society against those that eat far more than they need. From the ending of child labor to sick leave and to the 8-hour working day, these rights were won through collective bargaining. The very ideals that our society claims to pride itself on were never generously bequeathed by lords of the land. They were valiantly fought for and bitterly won. Wages in line with inflation for RMT establishes the same principle for the rest of us. The railway workers are striking for all of us. And we have with us today somebody who has led a direct action movement in this country, which is absolutely unprecedented. We have seen in the last 6 months, 2 sites for Israeli arms company Elbit Systems shut down permanently in this country. We have seen a subsidiary sold at a loss by Elbit Systems in this country. And the movement I'm talking about is Palestine Action. The person I'm talking about is Huda Amouri. If we can bring Huda up onto the screen, please. Huda, thank you so much for joining us today. Congratulations to you. Congratulations to the Palestinian people, to the Lebanese people, to the Egyptian people, to the Syrian people, to the Iraqi people, to all of those who love freedom around the world, to those who have resisted the Zionist project of colonization in Palestine and elsewhere across these last decades. What Palestine Action have achieved in this country will speak throughout the years to come. This is a major, major achievement. Elbit Systems has abandoned its London headquarters thanks to continuous and sustained action by Palestine Action. Thank you so much for joining us, Huda. How are you today?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm doing well. It's been a good week overall. So yeah, I'm glad to be on here at the end of it.
Absolutely. And if you could just break down for us to start with, what exactly is Elbit Systems?
Yeah, definitely. So Elbit Systems is, as you mentioned, Israel's largest arms firm who have got numerous sites here in Britain. They used to have 10 sites and now it's 8 after the launch of Palestine Action. Well, actually, Elbit Systems was founded in 1966 in Israel. And the main reason, the only reason that they were founded was to aid the dispossession and displacement and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. And since then, they have continued to develop their weapons on the occupied people of Palestine. And then these weapons are often built in part or in full here in Britain, in our towns and cities across Britain, and then they're shipped off across the world to be used in other repressive regimes. Elbit Systems manufacture 85% of Israel's military drone fleet. These drones are constantly used to entrench the apartheid system over the captive population in Gaza. They're used to surveil Palestinians there, but they're also used to attack and murder Palestinians. Not only do they supply the drones, but they also produce 80% of the land equipment used by Israel. We also know that their subsidiary, IMI Systems, also produces many of the bullets used by Israel's military. Basically, whenever you see a weapon or an attack on Palestinians and in Palestine, 99% of the time, you can trace that back to Elbit Systems. If they're not producing the whole weapon, they are producing parts of it. This is a company whose whole business model is based on the destruction of Palestine. And as such, they actually market their weapons as battle tested. That means that they literally test them on Palestinians in Gaza. When we see the assaults that happen there, often we hear it on the news, but we don't see that actually this is another opportunity for companies like Elbit to develop their weapons. In May last year, in May 2021, during the assault in Gaza, there was an interview with an Israeli military general who basically said that not only does Elbit provide them with the weapons to use to attack Palestinians, but they are also working alongside the Israeli military to help conduct the strikes. So they are both arming the apartheid regime and directly a part of the apartheid system against the Palestinians, who, of course, because Britain has been supporting the colonization of Palestine for over 100 years, has a strong presence here in Britain, and that's exactly what we're trying to end through direct action.
And just to confirm, I understand that Elbit Systems have had a key role in building the apartheid wall, which has widely been condemned as illegal. What other kind of security infrastructure has Elbit been involved in building, especially on this issue of sort of freedom of movement? Could you tell us a little bit more about potentially Elbit's role here in preventing people from moving around?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what you see, and Elbit is a perfect example of this, is how the repression that starts in Palestine expands across the world and actually comes to places like the West. So the apartheid wall you're talking about and the electronics that Elbit provides for, they gained a contract for Trump's wall, basically, in between US and Mexico, to enact the same repression against the people who are trying to flee to the US. And we see that the weapons, the drones which have been used and tested on the occupied people of Gaza are the same drones that are now being used by our border force, basically, to surveil and stop refugees from seeking safety in Britain. Not only that, but actually our police force is now piloting these drones because they want to phase out helicopters, basically, and bring in these drones for surveillance, basically, to surveil all of us. We also see this actually in Glasgow, for example. The Glasgow City Council had a deal with NICE, which is owned by Elbit Systems, to use the same facial recognition technology that they are using against the Palestinians in Palestine.
Right. And also, there are hundreds of thousands of Indian soldiers occupying Kashmir. What is the relationship between Elbit Systems and the Modi government and the Indian military?
So India is actually the largest importer of arms from Israel. So again, the weapons used on one occupied people, the Palestinian people, we are seeing being used against the Kashmiri people. So not only are we connected in so many ways to different struggles through the repression and the resistance Palestinians show, but also the companies that profit from the repression in Palestine are the same companies who are profiting from other people's repression. In a sense, they are intersectional in the sense that they will supply any regime that will take their weapons, no matter what human rights abuses or violations of international law that they are committing. And of course, they wouldn't care about this because Israel is an apartheid state. So they would not have any other moral compass when it comes to supplying other regimes. We've seen, for example, the drones that Elbit uses, a model based on that. The Watchkeeper drone is built in Elbit's site in Leicester. On their website, they openly admit and brag that these drones have operated for over 100,000 hours in Afghanistan and Iraq. And Elbit here, not only are they building components and weapons which go back to Israel to be used against the Palestinians, but they're also making deals based on the fact that they can develop these weapons on the occupied people of Palestine with the Ministry of Defence here. And every single time they make more deals, they are encouraging the further, the continuation of the apartheid regime, because now Britain is massively benefiting from it and making deals with companies like Albert Systems. They are hand in hand working with these companies and aiding Israel's apartheid regime every step of the way. And that's why we in Palestine Action do take drastic action, and we take direct action to stop these sites from manufacturing, because we've given up essentially on appealing to the powers that be, or appealing to the same government that has been complicit in the colonization of Palestine for over 100 years.
So in a way, that leads me to the next question. What exactly is Palestine Action?
So we are a direct action network across Britain. We launched in July 2020, and we are basically taking aim at Albert Systems sites in Britain. And our main and only campaign is to shut Albert down here in Britain. We believe that we can win if we stay on a clear target, which, to be frank, should never have had a presence in Britain in the first place. So since our launch, we have, as you can see, there's a variety of actions. We stormed their headquarters, for example. We've blockaded their gates. We've climbed onto their rooftops and broken inside and destroyed their weapons of war directly. So when we mean direct action, we're going straight to the source and shutting them down continuously. It's sustained direct action. And, the beauty of it is, if you shut down a place enough times in a short period of time, they cannot operate. We know how these companies operate. They operate through profit, and the more they produce, the more they profit, and the more weapons that are made. If we can directly intervene in the production of these weapons and in the operation of these sites, then it means it's only a matter of time and about the amount of people who take this action until another site is shut down. And that is our aim. We are bypassing the government, we're bypassing politicians, and we're going straight to the source and shutting Albert down.
Can you just break down for me what exactly happened in Oldham?
Yeah, so Oldham, for those who don't know, is a northern town in the north of England, and one of Albert's key factories, it was called Albert Ferranti Technologies, in Oldham, was running for over 10 years, and it had been a target for local campaigners who did a various amount of different tactics. But when Palestine Action launched, it was also, being an Albert site, it was a key target for us. And since the start of Palestine Action, we had regularly targeted Albert's Oldham site. This included a number of people locking on under caravans to block the entrances, people blocking the front doors, people climbing onto the roof. And there were 2 Kashmiris actually who went inside and allegedly caused £500,000 worth of damage. And obviously, Kareem, you performed outside there as well during one of the protests. And we just heard in January this year that they sold off their factory in Oldham at a loss. So that was the first, huge victory for Palestine Action and for the people of Oldham, and of course the Palestinian people and all those affected by Albert's weaponry. But it was also confirmation and reassurance that the strategy of direct action worked, and what it required was to emulate that success across all of their sites in Britain.
And also a key component of the struggle in Oldham was the local community setting up stalls in the town centre. There was people going door to door and flyering and speaking to local residents. Also, to what extent would you say the collaboration between Palestine Action, coordination, and the local community, and the continuous protests outside of it, were vital to that result in Oldham. And also, if you could just expand a little bit on the details of Oldham's subsidiary, of Elbit's subsidiary in Oldham. What was it called? What was it? How much was it bought for, and how much was it sold for?
Yeah, definitely. So the community mobilization in Oldham was brilliant to see, and actually, it's quite sickening, but in a way, it's an advantage to us that many of these Albert sites are actually placed in communities where there is a high population of Kashmiris or people from Muslim background and people who are supportive generally of the Palestinian people. So I think the community mobilization in Oldham was really just about people finding out that that company was there. And when they did, no one wanted the company there and was shocked that it was allowed in there in the first place. And you know, from May 2021, there was regular protests every week outside that factory. But also, when it came to the direct action that happened there, you know, the community came out quite big numbers every single time to support those activists who went on the roof, or to support the activists who were arrested, or to wait for them outside the police station. So there was always this collaboration and mutual respect and support for each other, and working together in that sense, not necessarily in a very manufactured, how we're going to do this together, but it was kind of more fluid and natural. And actually we saw this, you know, in other places, which I'll go onto, but this factory, so it was announced, there were rumors for about a month or 2 months beforehand that this factory was going to go, but it was nothing confirmed. I think it was the morning of January 10th when this Elbit press release came out. And, you know, they said that they were reorganizing their activities, which meant selling off this subsidiary, which they sold for 9 million, despite the fact that they bought it 10 years before for 15 million pounds. So actually that, you know, and as we know, inflation is always on the rise. That is actually a massive loss for that company and goes against the very nature of Albit's strategy outside of the apartheid state, which is basically to acquire as many companies as possible, to expand their portfolio and their brand as far as possible, rather than to basically shut their doors and pack their bags and leave Oldham. But when it came down to it, you know, if it's impossible to operate, if it's impossible, and you know, in the Oldham site as well, what we saw was the amount of security that they kept paying for. You know, so after every action, the security would increase slightly, and they at one point had several security guards, including with dogs, sometimes patrolling the roof, and they still couldn't stop activists from breaking into their premises and destroying their equipment. We saw in May last year that local police were stationed outside their factory during the assault on Gaza to protect Elbit during that time, because they knew that you could trace back what was happening to a certain extent to factories like that in Oldham, and that people weren't going to stand for it. But despite these measures, when it becomes impossible to secure yourself as a supposedly, you know, multinational defense company, it's embarrassing for them. But also it's impossible for them to continue. They need security, they need privacy. And if you consistently violate that and damage them before they're able to send these products off to another place, then the only option left for them is to pack their bags and leave. And that's where we're at, you know, in terms of the actions that we need to take. We need to leave no room for anything else but for them to go.
Absolutely. Now, could you just give us an outline of how Elbit Systems, this massive company with networks in many different places, with a lot of power, billions of dollars passing in and out of it and through it, was bullied out of its London headquarters by Palestine Action?
Yeah, definitely. So actually, we launched Palestine Action by myself and some others. There was a handful of us, and you know, we were very kind of like very grassroots, in the sense that the cardboard stencils we had was cut in my front room very badly, and we'd gone in with like leftover paint, and we just decided to storm their offices with a videographer at the time. And you know, when we went in the first time, we were massively outnumbered by security, but we still managed to cover their offices in red paint, and we promised them that we would be back. We left on their walls that we would be back, and we went back a week later, and we kept coming back. And actually, those videos that people saw was what launched Palestine Action. And at that time, we had lost any faith in government, but we still had faith in people. And we knew that if enough people knew about Elbit, and if they saw the power of direct action, that they would join, and they did. And so several actions continued against their London headquarters. At the same time, there was a campaign against their letting agents, JLL, Jones Long LaSalle, which involved numerous actions defacing their offices across their sites in Britain. They're like the second biggest real estate agent, I think, in the world, or at least in Britain. And so that we had this kind of two-pronged approach in terms of pressuring both the letting agents to evict them, who had the power to evict them, but also for making it impossible for Elbit to remain there in the first place. And actually, all of this kind of built up, but in the end, the kind of tipping point was, I think it started in April, there was constant direct action outside of the doors of 77 Kingsway, where their headquarters was. This involved many activists locking on, throwing paint all over their building. Some points it was twice a week, and that happened for a few weeks, actually, until we heard the news that they had enough and they were going to leave their headquarters. So it was an absolutely brilliant victory to have, and not long after we forced them out of Oldham. But also, I think the power of this is that they obviously used London as this, and they had this prestigious office. And before Palestine Action started, you know, they had all these plants outside, this overhang, and it looked very, you know, expensive, like they would want to, you know, impress whoever they're meeting, whatever politicians they're meeting, possibly, or other businesses. But in the end, it ended up looking absolutely horrendous, because they kept boarding it up, etc. And I think they just had, we don't know actually completely what happened, if Elbit decided to leave from their own accord or if the landlords evicted them, but we will know exactly, we will know that very soon when it comes to our court cases.
Now, Huda, it seems to me that Elbit fears taking this to court. Now, we have the precedent of the Raytheon 9 in Derry, when they shut down the Raytheon factory. When they were eventually taken to court, they were acquitted, and the Raytheon factory had to leave Derry because of what was, you know, because of the shame of what was revealed about Raytheon in court. So it seems that arms companies have a fear of the disinfectant of sunlight. Why is it that Elbit seems hesitant to step into court with Palestine Action?
Well, there's a bit of background to this. So before Palestine Action launched, several of us had taken sporadic action against Elbit sites in Britain, not to the same level as we do now in Palestine Action, and it was very infrequent. But what we all noticed from people taking action in Kent, people taking action in Shenstone, was that none of these cases were going to court. They would either be dropped the day before, dropped when we asked for disclosure requests, or people weren't charged at all. And it was getting a bit silly, to be honest with you, because we just thought we wanted to get Elbit in court, we wanted to expose their crimes, and we knew that actually whatever happened, we could argue our case, and we wanted to turn it around onto Elbit's crimes, because that is the reason we take action. This company shouldn't be allowed to be here in the first place. I think with Palestine Action launching, and the sustained action and the increased damage to their sites, and you know, some actions knocked them out of production for several weeks, they were put into a dilemma that we want them in, which is basically, you know, if we don't prosecute, then they can just damage all of our buildings with no consequences. And you know, and if we do, they fear losing in court and being exposed for the war criminals that they are in a British Crown court. And so I think it's very clear that Elbit do not want the scrutiny over their operations in Britain, and they don't want to accept defeat. They've already had to accept defeat at 2 of their sites, and having to be then embarrassed by the court system, it's further, paying to their already existing injury when it comes to this. But also, like in Derry, when you're found not guilty, especially at a Crown Court level, then it proves that not only do you not have protection because activists will do everything they can to shut you down, but you don't have any legal protection in this country. So if they lose in the courts as well, then, we're going to see many more sites closing down and then packing and leaving Britain for good. So we have seen, I think over 20 cases at the moment going on. And the vast majority of our cases are Crown Court, because most of our actions involve rooftop occupations, high-level damage of their infrastructure and their weapons. And this puts it into a Crown Court, which is trialed by a jury. Now, we want to be in front of a jury. But what has happened by chance, supposedly, is that only the magistrate's court case went first, which is in front of one judge, and you're much less likely to win in that situation. But still, in the first court case, which was a magistrate's court case, a magistrate's judge found the activists not guilty of committing any crime, despite the fact that they openly admitted to throwing bottles of red paint and locking on to blockade their doors. Actually, he said that the actions were justified in comparison to what this company does. And I think anyone who is sane will see it the same way. And to be honest, when it comes to a jury, I think most people, unless you're profiting from the arms trade or benefiting from it, do not support the building of weapons to murder other people. That goes against everything we're, taught as human beings.
What do you make of the recent visit by a delegation from the Israeli police to Hackney to meet with the Met Police there?
I think it's absolutely abhorrent for them to do that, but I'm not really surprised. Actually, I'm more surprised that they would openly publicize it. And actually, because we are aware that there's a lot of collaboration that goes on behind closed doors, but the fact that they had the audacity to publicize it in addition to that as a good thing to do, when we're seeing the oppression and the tactics that the Israeli police use against the Palestinian people, shows that the police and the state are not on the side of the Palestinian people. They're not on the side of international law or people's rights. They are on the side of an apartheid state. For us, that's very, very clear. And the more that they show their hand, the more they're exposing themselves. But I think as well, the reaction against it is also testament to show that the people are not on the side of the state's alliance when it comes to Israel's apartheid state. And to be honest with you, that is where our strength is through the grassroots, not necessarily the political establishment. And we know that the majority of people, if they don't already know about Palestine, when knowing of the facts or supportive of the Palestinian people. And it's about harnessing that power and harnessing those people who more and more people are willing to sacrifice their liberty to end the British complicity of Israeli apartheid and to shut Elbit down, whilst we're also seeing the state's ties deepen. So really, the things are becoming more and more distant in terms of the people and the government, to the point where there will be a breaking point.
Now, there's been an article published today, I think, by Kit Clarenberg in the Electronic Intifada, in which he questions whether new legislation being pushed through by Priti Patel is targeting Palestine action. What do you make of it?
Yes. So, so the National Security Bill, we were made aware of it through an email by a journalist who said, "Have you seen this bill and it might be affecting Palestine action?" And reading through it, there's a few parts which are very alarming. But specifically for Palestine action, there's an offence they're trying to put in, I think, called sabotage, which is basically, it's almost taken from our actions agreement. And honestly, in one sense, it's about damage and destruction against assets, which is in contradiction with the state's policies. Or I might be paraphrasing on that, but basically what they consider an asset now in this bill is any site which is producing weapons, parts, research for the UK Armed Forces. Now, we know that Elbit also supply the armed forces. And so this would essentially protect Elbit even more. And the proposed sentence they're putting is maximum sentence of life imprisonment or a fine, or both. You know, I would personally take the fine over life imprisonment, but this is the situation that we're in when they're pulling in offences which are literally equal to murder. And the irony of it, when literally these companies are responsible for the killing of so many people, that those who try to stop it, they're treating this way. It's exposing them more and more. And to be honest, you know, it took 6 months after the closure of Oldham to close the London headquarters. Palestine Action is growing day by day, and we're not wasting any time. So they can spend the time legislating against us, but we're going to get on with finishing the job and shutting down the rest of these sites. And we won't be stopped. If anything, it's actually some sort of shows to us that actually the state is so desperate to protect Elbit, and that they do see us as a threat. And we are a threat to Elbit Systems' existence in Britain, and we're openly proud of that.
Absolutely. More power to you. Now, Al-Ad is a settler group that has a wide level of influence within Jerusalem. It has been instrumental in the cleansing of Silwan, the Palestinian area of Jerusalem, and also is active in Sheikh Jarrah. It's also known as the Friends of the City of David. Now, I've done research which has revealed that you actually have a UK branch of this organization operating here, defined as a charity by the Charities Commission. It goes by the name of UK Friends of the City of David. It has all the same directors on its board that the one based in occupied Palestine has, including a spokesperson for the Israeli military, Doron Spielman. Now, what I've also found when looking at the millions and millions of dollars is pumped into this operation yearly from many different sources, but one interesting aspect when going through their funding with a fine tooth comb is that historically this organization, the City of David Foundation and Friends of the City of David, have received funds from Elbit Corporation. What does that say to you, that this arms company has seemingly, whether there's some sort of charitable arm to it, as it's funneled funds into an organization ethnically cleansing Palestinians from East Jerusalem? What do you make of that?
I mean, it's disgusting to hear, especially how they use this charitable status. We've been seeing this being used in other ways. You know, there's nothing charitable about ethnically cleansing or dispossessing the Palestinian people, or you know, or murdering, or entrapping, you know, 2 million people into one of the most densely populated areas on earth. There is nothing charitable about doing that, and I am, to be honest, not surprised that Elbit, again, is in another way a part of the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. If anything, I'm surprised that they're actually, you know, they're funneling the funds through, because they are also, you know, gaining so much funds from the ethnic cleansing. So it's almost like it's going back into one circle. So it sounds like to me, but it shows what Elbit was set out to do, and that has never changed since its formation. It was set up to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people. It was set up to arm the Zionist militia against the indigenous population of Palestine, and it will continue to do that. And every time it's making deals abroad and it continues to operate, all it does is further that aim. And that's exactly why we have to dismantle this company and not allow them to operate here in Britain, where in comparison to Palestinians or to others who are at the end of these weapons and these repressive tactics, we do have privilege and we do have an ability. You know, whatever state tactics that they try against it does not compare at all compared to those used against the Palestinian people. And the fact that they're making their weapons here, we have to make this their biggest downfall and get rid of them, despite what our government chooses to do. We can, and we've proven through people power, through direct action, we can shut these sites down. And so I'd encourage everyone to join Palestine Action and to join us in this mission.
And what we have exemplified and articulated by the existence of Palestine Action is the clear commitment to fulfill our duty here. So when we understand that these weapons are targeting people we believe ourselves to have an affinity with, the assertion of Palestine Action is we will stand between those weapons and you. And that is the message that Palestine Action is sending to Palestinians inside Palestine, to the 1 in 3 refugees in the world who are Palestinian, to the over 12 million Palestinian refugees in the world, the 12 million Palestinians in the world, the people of Lebanon, the people of Egypt, who have lost, the people of Syria, the people of Iran, the people of Iraq, who have lost life to this Zionist adventure in Palestine. Huda, just before we wrap up, what is your message to the Palestinian people as a survivor, as a struggler, as somebody who is actually at the forefront of this daily battle? What is your message to your long-suffering, long-struggling people?
I think I'd want to thank them for showing the way when it comes to resilience and resistance, and to never give up the fight, and that we can win, and that we will fight alongside each other, and that, you know, that's their resistance is what inspires us every single day to keep going, and that we stand with you. We're willing to make small sacrifices in comparison, in order to do everything we can to not allow those who profit from your oppression to continue to operate in Britain. And solidarity forever. We will not give up until we shut Albert down. We promise that.
Thank you very much, Huda. We'll see you again. And thank you to all of the viewers. We'll see you next time on The Watchdog. This is Low Key signing out from Mint Press. Thank you.